Hey, welcome back to Driver 88. Now, the last few months, we've been able to test the STO and the Lamborghini Huracan 610-4. Now, they are the bookends of 10 years of production of the Huracan from 2014 to 2024. It's the quintessential supercar of the 2010s, and I kind of want to try every single model. Thankfully, my friends at Cavallo have no less than half a dozen of them. And I've been looking at the market recently, and I haven't driven a Performante for a good 7 or so years since it came out. So I want to compare it today with an EVO rear-wheel drive. And I have a feeling that after all these 13 different variants, it's actually the Performante that is still the best Huracan you can buy for a bunch of reasons. We're going to find out now. So thankfully our friends at Cavallo have no less than 6 different Huracans to drive. Today we've got the rear-wheel drive version, which I've never driven before, and I'd like to compare it to the Performante, which I haven't driven for 7 years. Firstly, what do you think about the looks? You can tell why the EVO looks the way it was, because everybody loved the look of the Performante. The front and the rear, far better looking rear fascia with the exhaust, and the shark sort of look of these cars got ever more aggressive from the original 610. Now, as far as I can tell, even though this is the all-wheel drive version, with dry weight, it actually is still lighter than the EVO, but I'm happy to be corrected on that. And that's due to, of course, more carbon across the entirety of the car. Of course, it also makes a lot more downforce than the standard 610 and the EVO. So the Performante, now 7 years old, the power was never superseded in this car. 631 horsepower, 600 newton meters. Even though the Huracan continued for many more years, it didn't make any more power than this. What I have next to me is the rear-wheel drive EVO. Now this one has 30 more horsepower than the first rear-wheel drive at 602 and 560 newton meters. So with straight line heroics and power, the Performante still remains quite desirable because even the Tecnica, which came out a number of years later, could maybe be slightly faster in a straight line. You weren't getting that much of a performance increase. So this thing still backs up all the way to the STO straight line heroics, which we drove the other week. So the Performante and the EVO, they both make their peak horsepower at 8,000 RPM. So that also hasn't changed. They both make their peak torque at the same RPM, so that also hasn't changed massively. The 7-speed dual clutch auto in both cars is very similar, despite maybe some different gearing, particularly for a rear-wheel drive car. Both cars also, as far as I'm aware, can take you to a top speed of 325 kilometers per hour, which is more than enough for a straight line on the racetrack, which is where the Performante is particularly comfortable at. This car was heavily marketed with a rather dubious Nürburgring lap time of 6:52 that a lot of people kind of questioned. So how did it go with third-party testing across the board? Well, against the 488 GTB, it beat it in every single test that I could find, 12-0. It won 8 out of 18 tests against the 720S McLaren, which had a fair bit more power than this car. Against the Pista, however, it was able to rack up a couple of wins, a couple of draws, but mostly the more powerful and more expensive Pista had the Performante's measure across third-party testing. Still though, today, if you can get the very best lap times out of a Performante, you're a far more special person than I. The Performante sat at about $525,000 before options 7 years ago. Now, when I look at all the 5 different examples on the market currently today, almost all of them are asking over 500 grand. So if you were able to enjoy a Performante for say 3, 4, 5, 7 years, you've only lost roughly about 10% or a little bit more in that time. So I think bang for buck, for your experience, that is really quite good because all those cars also have been used. They've got kilometers on them. So the Perf continues to look pretty good from an ownership experience. So we've also got one of these, the EVO rear-wheel drive. This could be potentially the absolute Goldilocks of the Huracan range. The Performante may well be the best, but this is the most affordable, the cheapest Huracan you could buy at the time. And it's got 30 more horsepower than its predecessor. This car could actually be the fun car of the range, but also be not as extreme as the STO that we drove the other week. I'm really keen to drive this car because it's going to match the fun of rear-wheel drive and maybe the drivability of an EVO. And that is, I think, a really good marriage. And you're not going to pay an enormous amount of money for it compared to maybe an STO with all the crazy ad personam specs. The thing with this car, you would think that it's quite common, but actually, there's only 2 of these for sale in Australia. Across the sort of 66 Huracans that we have here in Australia, only 2 of them, Huracan rear-wheel drive EVOs. Quite interesting. Now, if this could be the Goldilocks version, though, I have missed out on a couple of Huracans. The Storato, I don't even see as something worth mentioning, but the Tecnica is something that we also want to get on the channel. That is the sort of middle of the road in rear-wheel drive Huracans between this, Tecnica, and then STO. Could that potentially be the better all-round car than this? It is far more expensive, though, than the rear-wheel drive EVO. Now, I did absolutely love driving the STO. I feel like it was the most engaging steering I've ever driven in a Huracan, but there's a reason why there are dozens of them for sale even here down under, and that's because they're very harsh and super track focused. This car still has the rear-wheel drive engagement and lighter weight, but it's got the sort of comfort of EVO, which means that we have slightly softer seats, but we still have, take it for a drive, that incredible sound. Now, it's no secret, of course, that the V10 is now discontinued, and we've had a few of them on our channel. Let's listen to now the EVO, the 610, the STO, the Performante. Let me know which one you think sounds best. Now, the first thing I will say is that EVO rear-wheel drive is just that little bit easier to get in and out of, and it doesn't feel particularly quieter than the Performante, even though Lambos and just every other car has gotten so quiet from about 2020 onwards. Now, the Temerario is imminently going to start delivery for customers, and of course with that car you've got a V8 with 10,000 RPM as a red line or so. The tone of that V8 really sounds a little bit peculiar, and I can see why the prices of certain Huracans, largely due to this, is firming up a little bit, because you'll never get this V10 sound again. With this EVO rear-wheel drive, we have quite skinny front tires, believe it or not. So 245 section front tires is very small. A GT3 has 255s, a 3RS has 275s. So we have very little weight up front and very little tire. So 60-40 weight distribution reminds me of supercars of decades ago. So when this car lets go, you're going to need to catch the rear. Can't really show you anything now on the street, but this guy will step out very easily. Now, if I compare the suspension in Corsa mode to the STO and even an Aventador SVJ, it's still far more compliant than those cars, as it should be, on our crappy roads. For me, this is perfectly acceptable even in Corsa mode. I don't mind bouncing around a little, makes things just a little bit more exciting. Now, when you put the car into Strata mode, of course, everything is as smooth as silk, even though you're in a Lamborghini with a V10. Gear shifts are super smooth, everything softens up. If you don't have any back or hip problems and you're a little bit shorter, you could definitely drive this daily. There's no reason why you couldn't. Now, I've wanted to drive this car for a while because I thought to myself, it's probably 80% of the driving experience of an STO for a lot less money. But one thing that's kind of stood out to me is, I think I'm a much bigger fan of the front end of the STO and the steering than this car, even though in a straight line, you're barely gonna know the difference. Now, it's just a little bit harder to get into the Performante. The seats are a little bit more contoured, but they're not as crazy as, say, like an SVJ seat, which absolutely destroys your back. This car seems a little bit louder. I've got still about the same amount of headroom. The sound though, particularly when you start the car in Corsa mode, truly incredible. Now, you may disagree with me, but there's one thing that I'm really glad Lamborghini left in the past, and that is forged carbon. I didn't like it when it came out in 2017, and I still don't like it now. It just reminds me of a bench top, and it's just a point of personal preference. Forged carbon can disappear back to whence it came. Now, the Performante doesn't have the straight line punch of a lot of the Ferraris and McLarens we often drive, but an incredible progression of power that's so satisfying, and a responsiveness that only a V10 can give you. Now, it's worth pointing out that, of course, the Performante is well past its warranty date, whereas the EVO is still, in most cases, sitting within warranty, and you can purchase 3 and 5 year servicing packs from Lamborghini from those cars. But we'll check in with our mechanic anyway about buying a Performante when they're used. So we're here with Ray from Ray's Eurotech. Now, he works on our personal cars. Ray, yes. Used Performante, generally from what I read and see, the 5.2 litre V10 is pretty rock solid compared to its competitors from a maintenance and servicing standpoint. What do you see out there? What should I look for if I'm looking at buying one? Look,
if the service history is not there great, obviously you would expect some common issues, the gears and the timing chain stuff. But if the car's been looked after, service every 5,000 to 6,000 K or minimum 10,000 K, then it should be fine, man. The common thing is on there is the VVT valves. They do play up, and we have seen the issues like the VVT valve and blowing fuses and stuff because the short circuit, and then it will blow a lot of other fuses. But it's just a simple straight fix, man. Nothing major you drop in the motor or anything like that. No, nothing major, but it's pretty like bulletproof. Yeah,
Ferrari or McLaren issues compared to
no, not really. So it's bulletproof, so it's a solid car.
Awesome.
So
it certainly is an event to drive the Perf in just everyday situations, particularly, I mean, when you get to a little bit of tunnels, it's truly brilliant. This car just feels that more dialed in. The steering, even though it's a little bit heavy on the nose, it just feels a lot more direct than the EVO. And in driving 4 different Huracan models and then Huracans over the years as well, I still think the Performante is my choice out of all of them.